Money, power, politics. And this evening, all eyes are on the Federal Reserve. The Senate has voted to confirm President Trump's top economic advisor, Stephen Miran, to the Federal Reserve Board, leaving the door open for him to vote on interest rates during the Fed's two-day meeting, which starts tomorrow. Also voting on interest rates, Donald Trump's least favorite governor, Lisa Cook. Earlier this evening, a federal appeals court rejected the president's request to remove her ahead of this week's meeting. With me now, Gillian Tett, columnist and member of the Financial Times editorial board, and Max Chafkin is here, Bloomberg Businessweek journalist, host of Bloomberg's Everybody's Business podcast, the paperback version of his book, The Contrarian, Peter Thiel and the Rise of the Silicon Valley Oligarchs, was just released. All right, let's start with Miran's confirmation.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this in a bunch of different ways. Donald Trump obviously is trying to exert political pressure on the Fed to basically bring the Fed, I think, more in line with his policy preferences. And that policy preference, as he's made clear over and over again, is drastically lower interest rates. Now, that obviously raises a lot of concerns about inflation, also sort of knock-on effects. What happens if you have a Fed that's not independent? But I think that's what's going on. I think these two stories are basically different sides of the same story.
But with or without Miran, there's a good chance the Fed is going to cut rates on their own. You write that this isn't just about the Fed cutting rates. This is about the president trying to change the mission of the Federal Reserve.
Well, it's very interesting if you look at what someone like Steve Miran and Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and some of the actual potential next Fed governors like Kevin Walsh have said over the last year. And they all say that they want the Fed to be independent and it's important for the American economy. But they also say that the Fed has had mission creep and they don't like the quantitative easing that was unleashed. And they think the Fed needs to go back to basics, which is basically a much narrower mandate. So they're not exactly saying the Fed has to be stripped of all independence, as some people have interpreted what the President Trump is saying, but they are saying the Fed needs to change. So the fight goes much further than just the question about interest rates.
So let me be clear. If Donald Trump was in office when quantitative easing took place, he 1,000% would have backed it. Let's talk about Secretary Bessent saying that there may be a framework for a TikTok deal. Yet he said, as if this thing goes through, they're not going to tell us any details. We don't even know who the parties are. How could this possibly be?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a negotiation that is going on right now over not just TikTok, but sort of broader U.S.-China trade relationships. I think we have some sense of an outline of a deal. Basically, it would be a politically acceptable U.S. entity taking control of some part of TikTok. Maybe it's the algorithm, maybe it's just data. I don't think we have a clear sense because China would also have to approve that. Also, there are going to be questions about sort of political connectedness and so on. You know, one of the main potential buyers is Larry Ellison, of course, big Trump supporter. There are other Trump-supporting VCs who are certainly vying for a piece of this, including Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital firm. So I think it'll be some Trump-connected tech company taking some piece of this company.
But here's the ironic thing that's got completely lost in the debate until recently, which is that everyone describes it as a Chinese company. Well, ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, actually has at least 60% of its economic value owned by American investors. And that's been the case for a number of years. And those American investors just happen to be some really big private funds, many of which are close to Donald Trump, and mutual funds as well.
Yeah, the wealthiest guy in Pennsylvania, a huge Republican and Trump backer, is one of the daddies here. Yeah.
Jeff Yass, exactly. And so it's maybe no accident that President Trump began to change his tune on TikTok, having criticized it viciously before, when he realized that actually Jeff Yass, who's one of the biggest owners in terms of the economic value of TikTok, was a big donor to him as well.
So when you're wondering who are the big holders of Trump meme coins, you might want to look no further than some of those Byte dancers. New topic. There's actually a growing rift within MAGA around AI. Donald Trump at this point is all in AI, the technology, but his base is starting to push back against it.
It's interesting. If you listen to what Donald Trump was saying on the campaign trail and at various times during his sort of appearance in public life, he's been very hard on big tech companies. And yet, at the same time, you have Trump and all these tech guys sitting down in the White House the other day, being very obsequious. You know, it's all buddy-buddy. Trump's AI policy to date is basically completely hands-off. And like you're saying, you're seeing people in the MAGA world. So people like Steve Bannon are talking about AI as summoning the demon. So really raising warning signs. Marjorie Taylor Greene sort of warning about the environmental impact of these AI data centers. And at the same time, you have this kind of tech-aligned part of the Trump coalition basically saying hands off completely. Peter Thiel giving these antichrist lectures in San Francisco right now as we speak.
And those are people that are making Trump exponentially wealthier.
I mean, you can also just divide it. It's much simpler than that in some ways. It's populists versus tech oligarchs. And the MAGA group Donald Trump has stitched together this really bizarre alliance between populists, nationalist populists like Steve Bannon, tech oligarchs like Elon Musk, and
who those
Thiel.
populists were originally formed the MAGA base to stand against those other guys.
Absolutely. And you have the old-style Republican conservatives who decided to go in with Trump. So you have these three different factions which do not sit easily together. And AI, in some ways, is the ultimate flashpoint. Immigration was another flashpoint because, again, you had populists against the tech libertarians, and the latter mostly liked immigration.
All right, new topic. The president is also now looking to push ending quarterly earnings reports from companies, saying they will no longer have to report quarterly earnings. And actually, an SEC spokesperson said they're prioritizing it, i.e., fast-tracking it. Why should this matter to the average viewer here?
Well, first of all, it's another great way for Donald Trump to distract people. Just when things get nasty, he basically pulls another rabbit out the hat.
But lots of people don't pay
TV.
attention to something like
Well,
this.
absolutely. And it's another way to basically curry favor with businesses because businesses have long hated having to do this.
Of course.
Because guess what? No one likes to be transparent if they don't have to be. And of course,
Imagine if you didn't get a report card every quarter. Wouldn't that be my kid's dream?
Well, the issue, I mean, it's a bit more subtle than that because, in fact, internationally, there are other countries which don't require quarterly reporting. It's just half-year reporting.
Yeah.
And lots of companies like this. But at the same time, it's not a good look when you're doing a whole bunch of things across the country which are having impacts on companies like tariffs, which you may not want people to know too much about or talk about.
All right, then before we go, let's talk about one other country, England, Great Britain. The president is headed there on Wednesday. This is a very big trip. What do we need to know? Because it's unusual.
This is basically, fundamentally, a Disneyland reality TV royal show designed to appeal to Donald Trump, who obviously would like to be a king. So you're going to see a lot of royalty. You're going to see lots of pomp and circumstance. The British are already telling the Trump team that they're laying on more horses in the parades than they had for the French. That's important. And you're going to see every single bit of
But hold
state
on, that's important to whom?
to President Trump. And it's going to be state TV, if you like. And what's really interesting is that there's almost never been two state visits by the same president this close together.
And
So it
why would they be
shows-
doing this?
Because it makes great television for President Trump. And the British
But why? Yes, it makes great president for President Trump. But why would Great Britain be gifting this to Trump?
they want to try and create a working relationship, and they know their best single card is not the economy, it's not only the City of London, it's a royal family. That is their best card. It's no accident when Prime Minister Starmer came over to see Trump in the White House, he brought a letter from King Charles. They're doing exactly the same now. That is their most potent weapon, and they're laying on the royals big time to a man who'd like to be king.